Three or more notes played simultaneously with a harmonic function is the definition of chords we are using today. Simple definition, but it's not the easiest thing to master, especially on the guitar. So today we're covering the types of chords played on guitar, but more importantly, how to efficiently go about learning them. I can promise that if you download the free accompanying PDF and follow along, you'll have multiple big realizations along the way. Since we have three in the definition, our first chords are going to be triads. A triad only has three notes, but we can repeat any of those notes when playing a chord shape. You'll see that in both open position chords and bar chords. These are usually the two types of chords guitarists learn first, but I strongly recommend that you also learn your basic triad shapes on different string sets as soon as possible. As you learn triads 3 strings at a time, you start to see how the guitar is laid out with patterns across the neck, and this will dramatically improve your visualization and fretboard navigation. This is also a fantastic opportunity to learn inversions, which are the same exact chords with notes inverted or rearranged. There are a lot of different triads, but I'd say 4 are primary, and we'll discuss a few others later. You probably already know your major and minor triads. We also have diminished and augmented. Each of these chords can fit into one of 3 categories, and as you'll see throughout this video, these 3 categories are really going to be the only ones you need for the vast majority of your chord theory knowledge. And now we're on to 7th chords. Triads, tricycle, triangle, 3. So 7th chords must have 7 notes. Actually, no. 7th chords only have 4 notes, but to explain why, we need to learn about the first music game ever created, and it's called play a note, skip a note, repeat. And the rules of this game teach us a lot about chords. So we take a major scale, play a note, skip, and repeat. When we get to 3 notes, we have a triad, and if we continue the game, our next note is the 7th, hence 7th chords. Google will tell you there are 5 types of 7th chords, but I like to say there are 6. Major 7th, dominant 7th, minor 7th, half diminished, fully diminished, and minor major 7. By the way, that's why you should learn guitar from a person and not just Google. My course is linked below. Our 7th chords all fit into the same 3 categories, and some actually fit into multiple categories. The theory involved with this is actually super interesting, so you'll want to stick around for this later in the video. You'll recall that we made 7th chords with our play a note, skip a note game, and you probably also know that there are only 7 notes in the scale. So at this point, it looks like our game is done, but as you can see, there are still a few unaccounted for notes in the scale, and this video isn't nearly done yet. So our next step is to incorporate the other notes from the scale by extending the scale another octave. The first note, C, becomes the 8th note, or our octave. The second note becomes the 9th, and so on. Please don't let this confuse you. These are all the same exact notes as the first 7, they're just played at a higher pitch. Just like how you have a high E string and a low E string, they're the same note but in different octaves. So 2 is the same as 9, 3 is the same as 10, and so on. Since these notes extend beyond the first octave of the scale, they're called extensions. And each of these types of chords has a name that corresponds to the last note added. 9 chords are the simplest and most common extended chords. You can almost always add a natural 9 to a major 7, minor 7, or dominant 7th chord, since their corresponding scale all have the natural 2nd or 9th degree. However, since dominant 7 fits into the tension category, we can flatten or sharpen the 2nd, which gives us a total of 3 dominant 9 options. The sharp 9 and the flat 9 intervals are outside of our Mixolydian scale, which is the scale we get our dominant 7th chord from. But adding notes from outside the scale is just another way to add more tension, and since we are in a tension category, it works beautifully. We don't have time to fully explore the concept of tension chords and extensions in this video, but I'll just quickly tell you that almost any group of notes outside of our key signature can work as tension chords. And if you ask a music theorist why certain notes work together to create tension chords, they'll certainly have fancy, complicated explanations, but we can really think of this all as just a tension and release kind of a thing. And here's proof. This will be the perfect time for me to introduce you to a concept I call soft rules. They're going to be crucial as we move from ninths to further extensions. And I use the term soft rules whenever I'm explaining most music theory to my students. The name is exactly what it sounds like, and here's why I say it. I was lucky enough to study music theory in several institutions with many teachers from 2006 all the way until 2022 when I completed my PhD. I studied and did research on many different types of music, which included research on how competing music theories were codified across the world throughout history. One of the biggest lessons that I learned is that music rules are invented by normal people just like you and me. Sure, some of these rules have pretty solid mathematic ideas behind them, but some don't. And if someone creative enough comes along to break a rule, that new broken thing just gets considered a rule 100 years later when someone writes about it and puts it in the textbook. In fact, good music textbooks are basically just a list of really old rules, along with the famous people who broke the rules and made music better as a result. So whenever I teach music, again, I always say soft rules to, of course, encourage my students to learn these time-tested ideas, but to also not be afraid of breaking the rules if the music calls for it. So we're going to use the extended chord major 7 sharp 11 to illustrate several soft rules. You'll notice that this chord includes our original major 7 chord, our sharp 11 extension, and the 9th extension. That's because, technically speaking, every extended chord includes all the intervals leading up to the final extension that names the chord itself. Soft rule. So a 9 chord includes the triad, the 7th, and the 9th. An 11th chord includes the triad, the 7th, the 9th, and the 11th. And a 13 chord includes the triad, 7th, 9th, 11th, and 13. However, in practice, we often drop notes along the way, such as the 5th, or sometimes even the 9th. After all, a 13 chord should technically speaking include 7 notes, which is literally impossible to play on a 6-string guitar. Keep in mind, a lot of these music theory concepts were created with the piano, where we have 10 fingers, or orchestras, where we have dozens of musicians, not the guitar. Okay, so major 7 sharp 11 includes 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 sharp 11. Here's another soft rule: you can omit notes from a chord. That's how we get this very common major 7 sharp 11 voicing on the guitar. Now, when you look at the intervals of this major 7 sharp 11 chord, you might assume that there must also be a major 7 with a natural 11 chord, since the perfect fourth is found in the major scale. Well, you could play a major 7 with a perfect fourth or an 11th, but this is pretty uncommon because playing a perfect fourth with a major third causes an often undesirable clash. And that's why that play a note, skip a note game is another soft rule, because sometimes you have to sharp or flatten a note. In this case, we are sharping the 11th, although technically speaking, you could play the 11th if you like the way it sounds. When you combine all of these soft rules, we get our major 7 sharp 11 chord, which is very common. Now, there are, of course, a ton of extended chords, and if we covered every soft rule, the video would never end. But if you want to continue down this path and have everything explained slowly with more detail, it's all included with my course link below. And that one-time purchase comes with every other lesson I ever made on a ton of different topics, and all of my future lessons, lifetime updates, and so on. Again, it's all linked below if you're interested. So that prior soft rule of play all notes leading up to the final extension can be limiting, since it forces us to play a bunch of notes we may not want to play. That's where add chords come in. Whenever you see add next to a chord, that simply means play that triad plus whatever note is indicated. For example, we have both major and minor add 9 chords, and they don't have the 7th. There's a bunch of these chords and they sound really beautiful, especially on the guitar. The big exclusion from the add category is the 13. There's no add 13 chord. Instead, we call it a 6 chord. And if you're wondering why it's called a major 6 chord or a minor 6 chord instead of a major or minor add 13, we just need to think back to how we came up with our 13 chord to begin with. So we take a major scale, play a note, skip, and repeat. The rules of the game don't apply to the 6th, since the 6th note does not extend beyond our 7-note scale. And now we're at the point where we can look at 6th chords in depth versus 7th chords and extensions, and I can give you a taste of how learning all of these soft rules allows you to break basically any rule of music. Our example is this. Once you leave triads, major chords aren't really major and minor chords aren't really minor. And here's what I mean. When we look at a major 7 and compare it to a major 6, the major 6 is actually more stable and resolute. That's because the interval between the root and the 7th in a major 7th chord is pretty tense. Now, this is the desirable and beautiful tension, but it's tense nonetheless. You can hear it more in certain inversions, and it can even make it difficult to understand the chord quality itself at times. When we turn that into a major 6th chord, the tension completely dissipates and the major sound is completely resolute. So a soft rule could be major 6 has a purer major sound than major 7. However, even though major 6 chords are very pure, we can rearrange the notes to create a perfect minor 7 chord. And that's because a major 6 chord is a minor 7 chord in first inversion. So now we see a major 6 is more stable than a major 7, but a major 6 is really a minor 7. Let's go even deeper by recalling 2 prior soft rules. You can almost always add a natural 9 to a major 7, minor 7, or dominant 7 chord. Here's another soft rule: you can omit notes from a chord. Okay, so if we apply both of those rules, we could take our minor 7 chord, which is also a major 6 chord, we can add the 9th and also omit the root note. That's all fair and it sounds great. But it also technically turns the minor chord into another major 7 chord. So now a minor 7 can be a minor 9, which can be a major 7 that's also a major 6 or a minor 7. Apart from triads, major isn't really major and minor isn't really minor. And our minor 6 chord is a really nice, dark, and stable option for a minor progression, but it's also a little bit weird. So a minor 6 chord has the same exact notes as a minor 7 flat 5 chord, which we already learned is a tension chord. So now even our categorization of these chords is getting completely blurred because a minor 6 is minor, but if we invert it, it's also a tension. So I may have gotten carried away with that last section because I get really excited about this stuff and then I have to share it with you. But I don't want you to feel like this stuff is actually confusing or difficult or complicated. In fact, let me just tell you and show you why I actually made this video. So when I first started playing guitar, after about a year, my dad found this book in a thrift shop and bought it for me. It's kind of cool that on the cover of the book is actually carving guitars. But anyway, when I first got this book, I was both excited and mortified because I saw 12,000 in the title. And I thought that to become good at guitar, I'd have to memorize every single one of these chords in this book. But again, once I started actually learning guitar and learning music theory, I realized, like I showed you in that last section, that a lot of these chords are actually the same thing. There certainly isn't 12,000 things we need to learn. So that last section was really made to show you that once you learn a few of these key things, everything starts to fit into place much easier and you have to learn a lot less. With all of that talk of 7th chords and 6th chords and extensions, it's easy to forget about the triad. In fact, a lot of guitarists feel like open chords and triads are kind of a beginner or transitionary chord on our way to the more important and complicated extended chords, but that couldn't be further from the truth. In my opinion, the simplicity and clarity of triads will forever make them the most important chords. So let's conclude by discussing a couple more triad tricks. You'll remember from our earlier discussion on major 7 sharp 11 chords that playing a perfect fourth with a major third causes an often undesirable clash. Sus4 chords give us the ability to use that tension for sound by immediately resolving it down to the major third. And then we have the sus2 chord, which is another version of that same idea, but now we're taking the natural 2 and resolving it upward to the third. And these sounds are extremely common in many genres of music, from church hymns to present-day pop. The most obvious use for this chord knowledge is to write beautiful chord progressions, but learning chord theory is a huge shortcut to learning how to improvise and play single note lines, because we can take all of these same rules and same chords and just apply them to single notes. In other words, every beautiful chord and chord progression is also a beautiful melody waiting to happen. If you like this lesson, check out my course link below to really start to develop mastery of this material.